So they wheel me into surgery. They make me slide over from the bed onto the surgical table. I look to my right, and Jesus is standing there in a white robe. And he holds out his hand and he says, I want to answer your prayer. It's more than just faith now. I held the hand of Jesus. It was a physical thing. And I just know that there is life after death. There's life during this life too. I mean, Jesus is with me all the time, answering all these prayers, tiny miracles every day. I see his presence every day, but you just have to be aware of it. I think you just seek him out and he'll reveal himself to you.
Hey, welcome back to the Everyday Miracles podcast. I'm Julie Hedenborg, your host. My guest today did not believe in testimonies of near-death experiences where people are encountering Jesus in heaven until he had one himself. My guest today is Mike McKinsey, and he's here to share a physical miracle of healing that he had that would stand alone as a testimony, but he also experienced something completely supernatural that blessed him, changed his life. A few of the elements I want you to hear in this. Obviously, Jesus, there is a Jesus encounter that is fantastic. Another big moment, there's something that happened in his experience where he could not physically stand. It was so overwhelming. And then the last element that I love is that Jesus answered a prayer for Mike that he had had as a child that Mike hadn't even thought about in years. And I know it's going to bless you. So enjoy. Mike, welcome to my show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Julie. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I was really impressed by your testimony for many reasons, but can you start a little bit, just sharing a little bit of your background and your faith?
I was born in a Christian family. Pretty much church was just, mom took us there on Sunday and didn't get a whole lot out of it. I was a kid, just confused. People talking about heaven and God, and it's just a lot of, new stuff. And so it was just something I did as a kid. When I grew up, I had kids of my own and I thought, I need to get them to church, but we kind of bounced around a little bit. We moved a lot. And so we didn't really have, I would say, like a home church till my kids were in high school. And then we sort of found a place, bought a house, stopped moving around, started going to church regularly. So that's background in a nutshell, I'd say. I was kind of in construction all my life, either a superintendent when the NDE happened to me, I was a superintendent for a real estate development company. And so I was in charge of getting the houses built from, the ground up. They give me a piece of dirt and say, build this house with this elevation on this spot. And I would take it and run with it. And it was a neighborhood that we were developing. So I had like 30 to 35 houses at different stages of construction that I was in charge of. So very, very stressful job.
Mm-hmm. So can you fast forward a little bit to the big event where your oldest son gets married and tell us a little bit
Sure.
about how that unfolded?
So we were living in the Central Valley in California. He was getting married in Ventura. He went to school and was working in Santa Barbara, which is kind of almost Southern California, but it's on the coast, really pretty area. He said, we're getting married on a Saturday. We thought, well, let's go down there and meet his family and spend a little time in that area, get to do some sightseeing and stuff. So we went down there on a Wednesday, got there on Wednesday afternoon. My boys and I went out and played some wiffle ball home run derby in the park. So I'm this old guy that hasn't swung a bat very often against these, young whippersnappers. They're very good at baseball. So I was doing a little twisting of my body that wasn't normally used to twisting. So I always say, kind of keep that in the back of your mind because it kind of comes up later. Wednesday night after about dinner time, I started feeling a little sick and I thought, great, getting the flu, not feeling too perky. Thursday comes around. We did some sightseeing. We spent a lot of time, with her family, getting to know her family, really nice people. And I just kept getting sicker. I thought, shoot, I am getting the flu. At first I was kind of, trying to pray it away, but God had another plan, right? So Friday comes around. I'm still feeling a little ill. And by this time, I'm I start running a fever, and we had to go get our tuxes. We had the wedding rehearsal dinner, and it was kind of funny because I have this upset stomach, and I'm telling everybody, "Hey, I'm paying for this meal. This is an expensive dinner. I'm eating all of my food. I'm eating your leftovers. I'm eating one of every dessert." Which was a bit to do when with somebody that was getting the flu, right? But Friday night, after it was all done, everybody goes home back to their hotels. We're sitting there having a glass of wine, and my son's in the medical field, so we're kind of guessing, what could possibly be wrong. He says, "Well, maybe it's your appendix." And I said, "It's not my appendix. I mean, it couldn't be my appendix. I don't have that point tenderness." They always say, appendix, you touch your abdomen and it's going to really hurt. I thought, "No, it can't be it." And he says, "Well, maybe there's a blockage or something." He goes, "Why don't you just go get checked out?" And I said, "Okay, tomorrow after the wedding, I will." So we went back. He goes home. I go back to the hotel, and it's like 1 in the morning. I thought, I got to go get something for the pain because now my stomach's really hurting. And that thing where he said it might be a blockage, I thought, well, maybe I need something to take care of that. So about 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock, whatever it was, I go to the quick mart, quick stop, pick up some Tylenol and something to, make me go, right? Some laxative. So it said it'll work in 2 hours or it may take up to 24 hours. I thought, well, 2 hours would be great. I mean, get this all cleared out, go to the wedding, everything will be fine. Well, didn't happen exactly the way I had planned, but the Tylenol did kind of dull the pain a little bit, but I was still really sick. I mean, by now I'm sweating. I'm running a fever. We checked it in the morning. It was 102, but I thought, okay, we're almost there. We're almost to the finish line. So let's go to the wedding, get that over with. We did. Everything went great. It was a beautiful wedding. It was at a golf course. Perfect day. I mean, couldn't have asked for a better wedding. Did the whole reception thing. And after the reception was kind of winding down, people started leaving. My son comes to me and he says, "Okay, we're going to go to Heather's parents' house." Heather was the bride. "And we're going to go open presents and, keep the party going." And I said, "Guys, I got to go get checked out." So, I said, I've got to get this fixed, whatever it is. I got to get it taken care of. So my son told me to go to Ventura County Medical Center. So we go there to the ER, we check in, and it's almost midnight. So, you know, the, the place was really crowded. I mean, Saturday night, it was really crowded. So I'm just sitting there patiently, kind of drifting in and out of consciousness, right? I'm falling asleep and I'm just thinking, what is going on? So they finally call me back. The nurse in the ER did this test where first they took some blood and she says, "Yeah, you got a pretty bad fever going on. I think it's probably your appendix." She starts pushing on my abdomen and it didn't hurt. And I thought, in fact, I told her, I said, "Yeah, I just got the flu. It's just a flu. Just give me something for that, make it all better." So she taps me with this little rubber mallet, like what they tap your reflexes to check your reflexes on your knee. She taps the bottom of one of my feet and she says, "Does that hurt?" And I kind of laughed. I said, "No, of course not." She taps the other foot and man, the pain in my abdomen made me scream. And she said, "Okay, that's your appendix. I think it's probably," she's reading my blood report. She says, "Your white blood cell count's up and I think it's probably ruptured." She says, "Did you do any real weird physical activity?" And I thought, okay, Wednesday afternoon, we played home run derby. So I told her that. She says, "Well, if you had a swollen appendix, maybe you ruptured it." She says, "By the looks of things, I think it's probably ruptured. So I'm going to call a surgeon." Surgeon comes in about a half an hour later. He kind of pokes around too. And it still didn't hurt when they touched my abdomen. It was weird. But he says, "Well, I tell you what, I'm going to go in through your belly button with a scope, so you won't have a scar, but that way I can go in and see how bad it is, and we'll get you cleaned up." He says, "You'll be in here for, a day or two if it's not ruptured, but if it is ruptured, it'll be 3 or 4 days." So I said, "Okay." So not really concerned even at this point. I'm thinking, well, maybe it is my appendix, but I still say I got the flu. I mean, I'm a guy. We don't go to the doctor. We just put everything off. And here I put it off a really long time. So they wheel me into surgery. They me slide over from the bed onto the surgical table, which is always like, for some reason, it seems like it's too small, and it was really freezing cold in there. And it, I'm assuming they put a mask over my face to put me to sleep, but I honestly don't remember that because as soon as I got to the surgery table, I look to my right, and Jesus is standing there in a white robe, and he holds out his hand and he says, "I want to answer your prayer." And I'm thinking, okay, what's going on here? This is weird. Where's the surgeon? What's happening? I was just at, I'm kind of counting back in my mind, like, okay, I was at the wedding. Wait, I should be in surgery. And then I thought, I think I'm dead. I mean, Jesus is taking me to heaven. But then another thought that I had was, well, people, when they die, they always say they see their body, as they're floating away. And I thought, I'm not floating, but this is like Jesus is a physical person standing there. He's not a ghost. He's not floating. It's a man wearing a white robe. It looks nothing like the Jesus that I knew as a kid. It wasn't the white Jesus. He looked like an Arab man, dark hair, eyes that are like bluish green. And when his eyes looked in my eyes, he looked into my soul. There was no doubt that was Jesus. So I thought, he didn't say, let's go to heaven. I want to answer your prayer. I really don't have a choice here. Jesus is standing there holding out his hand. So I take his hand and I thought, as I'm taking his hand, I'm thinking, answer my prayer. Okay, whatever it is, let's go. So I take his hand. As soon as I did, I'm standing on with him on a green hill. There's grass below my feet, and my senses were heightened to the point where I could count every blade of grass touching my feet. It was amazing. But everything else besides the grass was white, like the brightest white I've ever seen, almost like a fog in front of me. And there's a light sort of off to my right that looks like the size of a basketball or so. That's wider, and it's round, and it's like brighter white than the rest of the white. It's glowing. And I'm looking at it, and this thing starts sending out these light beams that almost look like a fluorescent tube, light tube. You put them up in your shop, the big long things that are really brittle, but they're a little bit bigger and they're only about 2 feet long, but they're wider. They're like this big, and they start one at a time. They start coming at me, kind of sending, going by me. One of them starts coming right at my head, and I'm just fascinated by this light, and it hits me in the forehead. And as it does, it makes this kind of a buzzing sound, like a real low buzzing sound. As it goes through my head, and it warmed my whole body, like down to my toes. It was amazing. And so I look back at the light after this thing goes through me. I look back at the round light source, and there's the rest of the white gets pulled like somebody's pulling a curtain from my right to my left, like this. And it just opens up. The white goes away and it's replaced with this beautiful scenery. There's a valley below me in front of me. Now I can see on the mountain in front of me where the grass was at my feet. I see these like wispy little flowers that are sort of like bending in the wind, but I don't feel any wind, but they're like a light purple, almost pastel colors, really pretty flowers. And then there's a city at the bottom. This fog has kind of dropped like a veil over this city, but I can see like rooftops sticking up. There's this one great big gold dome. There's a couple other gold domes, and then there's these white, almost like steeples or spires, like a church steeple, real pointy, real skinny, tall. And the thing that I noticed about that is there were no crosses at the top. You know how a church sometimes has a cross at the top? There were no crosses. And I thought, well, that's weird. I mean, it's different. And I thought about that later. But as I'm looking now, I see on the other side of the valley, I'm looking at this city, and something inside me just knew this is a hustling and bustling city. That's New York City of wherever I am. But I can't see anything but the tops of the buildings. And then on the other side of that, there's another mountain that raises up in front of me, and it's covered in these like greenish, like a dark green pine tree. And And above that is the colors of the sky that I see. It's like a beautiful sunset. There's yellows and oranges and reds and like real big colors. There's blue at the top, couple of wispy little clouds, but it was like the most beautiful sunset I'd ever seen. And when I looked at the light source, now these little lights, these little light fluorescent tubes are going across the valley, and they're going across and they're hitting the trees. And on the tips of the trees, it looked like there was a diamond because one of these fluorescent tubes hits the diamond on the tip of one of these trees and it just explodes into hundreds of bright white, tiny little lights, like little light streaks. And as more of those things start coming out, they're hitting these diamonds and there's light popping all over the place. It's like bright white fireworks on every little branch. And they're just like bam, bam. And I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is just unbelievable. And Jesus says to me, when I look back at the light source, he says, it's the glory of the Lord. So I have to take a minute. It's still 20 years later. It gets me emotional because I'm back there. When he says it's the glory of the Lord, I couldn't stand. My knees got weak and I fell to my knees. And when my knees hit the ground, they shocked me and brought me back. And so now what I'm looking at, instead of this beautiful scene, I see a doctor leaning over me wearing a mask and he says, do you know your name? And I said, Mike, but I thought I said it in my mind. I didn't verbalize. And he says, do you know your name? And I thought, oh, I got to say it out loud. So I'm trying to get my thoughts together and I try to speak, but my mouth is so dry and I'm still really super hot again. And I said, Mike, and he says, okay, do you know where you are? And now I'm thinking, okay, where's Jesus? I'm confused. So I'm going back in my mind. Well, I was in surgery, the wedding. Oh yeah, I'm in Ventura. So I said, Ventura. And he says, but he turns around to the other people in the room. And this is when I realized there are 4 or 5 other people in the room. He says, okay, he's back. And I thought, he's back. Yeah. I'm not sure I want to be back compared to where I was. It was just amazing. And now I'm hot and sweaty again. I'm achy all over. I'm just back in so much pain. And he says, let's get him to ICU. So they wheeled me up to ICU. I stayed in ICU for 4 days. And then I developed some complications. I got a cyst that formed from all the germs. They were trying to finish me off. That's what the doctor told me. He says, yeah, they try and get together and they try and finish you off. I mean, I was almost dead anyway. So I spent 4 days in ICU and I ended up spending 8 days more in the hospital. So I was in there for 12 days total. The doc that surgeon came back to see me the next morning after this had all happened. And I started developing pneumonia, which is a whole other story. But I was just so weak. I could barely lift my hands off my chest. I'm just, I couldn't move. The surgeon comes in and he says, well, I'm glad to see you. You stayed with us. I heard you had a little episode last night. And I just kind of said, yeah, and that's about all I could say. And he says, yours was the worst case I've ever seen. And he started to walk out and he turns back around and he says, not exactly true. Yours isn't the worst I've ever seen, but it was the worst I've ever seen where the patient lived. And I thought, wow. He says, so I guess God's not done with you yet. And I said, well, thank you for saving my life. He was a really cool old surgeon. He came from Poland. He actually wrote a book about his, becoming a surgeon in America. And it's pretty funny stories. But anyway, he's a great guy. I was happy to get out of the hospital after that ordeal, but it was touch and go for a while there. The pneumonia thing was crazy. I started developing pneumonia and they had me breathe into this spirometer and I couldn't even hold it. They came in and packed me in ice because I was running 104 at that point. This was like 24 hours after the surgery. I was up to 104. They gave me oxygen. They made me breathe into the spirometer, trying to move the little marble. It's got like 0 to 10, and there's a little marble, and you breathe into it to try and clear your lungs. And I couldn't move that little marble to save my life. And I thought, I just went through the most traumatic thing. I thought, I'm not going through this, and I'm not going to die. I mean, I made up my mind. I am not going to die. She said, breathe into the little spirometer 10 times an hour. And I said, okay. And I probably did it 100 times an hour, even though I couldn't move my hands, but it finally cleared up, and then I finally gained my strength back. But it was quite an ordeal.
Yeah, what happened to have your appendix rupture like that? Oh, there's so much I could say. It's a miracle you're alive because what happens is you can have massive infection and to be 4 days ruptured, like the doctor said, you get into this place where we call it sepsis, where basically the infection is all through your body. The pneumonia, you can have multi-system organ failure, a whole sequela that follows that. I mean, it's a miracle you're here. So a couple of things that stand out to me too, it's amazing how all of these testimonies are so unique. And I've had many people see Jesus just like you did in the hospital, and they all come to my mind as we're talking. But the fact that you remember moving to the OR bed and it was cold is a surprise to me because most people don't remember that because we typically sedate you to go to the OR. So you were pretty lucid when you actually, whatever, I don't know what happened in between, if they started the induction of anesthesia and that's when you saw Jesus. I don't know if you were alert and you just saw him and you were immediately taken with him. So amazing. So amazing. And the heightened senses that's really common. The glory of the Lord. I have to share this verse with you really quickly. Other people have reported that the weight of being in his presence, they cannot physically stand up. I found the scripture and I just want to read it because the way you described what you saw and when Jesus told you it was the glory of the Lord, this is so beautiful. It's Revelation 21:11. Having the glory of God, its radiance like a most rare jewel, like a jasper, clear as crystal. I just love that. So, yeah, and even the way you came back and you had been communicating with Jesus through your thoughts, and then you almost had to catch yourself talking to the surgeon, like, oh, yeah, he didn't hear that.
Right.
That was something interesting I found too. But so obviously, you're not a believer in these testimonies. You have this experience. I know at one point, one of the testimonies you said that you cried for 3 days. You couldn't even share it with anyone at first. Can you
The
share
3
what that
days
was?
of my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you share what it was like and who you shared it with and what happened next?
Well, my wife came and saw me the next day, and she didn't know anything about it until after, talking to the surgeon. And and to be honest, when I saw the paddles, I thought, it, when I was talking to the surgeon and I said I'm in Ventura, and became aware of the fact that there were other people there. I saw those paddles and I thought, oh boy, I did die, but I don't want to know. I don't want to know how long. I don't want to know what happened. I want to know nothing about that because it scared me. You know, I mean, now I know where I'm going, and it was wonderful, but I had 4 kids at the time, and I mean, now I have like 13 grandchildren, so I would have never seen any of them. And I thought, I want to live. I don't want to go there yet. I mean, Jesus, in light of eternity, this life of mine is going to be just a blip on the radar. So I'm not ready yet. And obviously he wasn't ready for me. So it took me 3 days to tell my wife because I would say, "You're not gonna believe this," and I would just start crying because I'm right back there. I mean, telling this testimony was just so, it's just so emotional that finally when I told her, she had kind of a different sort of, I don't know if she really got it, but when I got home, I my friend from church, his name is Phil, he came over, and in those 12 days, I'd lost 35 pounds in the hospital. And so he comes in and he looks at me and he says, "Who are you? And what have you done with Mike?" And so I kind of laughed and he sits down and I said, "I've got to tell you this." And I was kind of practicing, how am I going to tell him what happened? I got to tell him. And so I start telling him, "Hey, I had this thing. I think it was a near death experience. Um, And during the hospital stay, I started writing it all down because I didn't want to remember, right? I didn't want to forget anything. I wrote down every little detail. And so when I was strong enough to write, it took a couple of days. But he says, wow, I can't wait to hear about it. And he sits down next to me and he holds my hand, and he's one of those touchy feely guys, and I love this guy because one of the other things that I love about him is if you say, I need you, could you pray for me? He'll grab your hand right there and pray. Like if you're in the middle of the mall, he'll pray. And I just love that. But he sits down and he says, so tell me about it. And I start telling him and I start crying. And as soon as I start crying, he starts crying. And he doesn't even know what I'm telling him yet. And so I'm struggling through this, and I get to the glory of the Lord part, and he's just like he's bawling with me. And I thought, I don't want to have this reaction. If is this what you want, God? You want everybody to cry? I mean, I know it's a wonderful thing, but I mean, I could just picture myself telling all my friends, I don't want to have them all cry, and I just thought, come on, Lord, I got to find a way, an effective way to tell this story. But I've never quite gotten to the point where I can just tell the whole thing without feeling that in my soul. But that's just it's from God. And so I've come to accept the fact that, okay, it's an emotional story and people are going to take it differently. But I have to tell you that when he said the glory of the Lord, I used to pray as a kid. Well, I used to pray that he would show me heaven, but I used to pray as a kid to show me the glory of the Lord because when I was a kid, I would, I just remember this vividly, laying on the living room floor with my sisters, watching a Charlie Brown's Christmas. And Linus comes out on stage with his little blanket. And he says, he's telling the story of Luke and the glory of the Lord shone all around him. I remember as a kid thinking, glory of the Lord, what does that look like? You got to show me that, God. You got to show me that. And so, 40 years later, here's the glory of the Lord. And I couldn't stand in that presence. I just couldn't stand. It's like the Mercy Me song, will you stand or will you fall to your knees or whatever that is? And I thought, yeah, I can't stand. I don't see how anyone could stand looking at the glory of the Lord. You know, but someday all knees will bow. So
Absolutely. And I love how you remember once you thought about it, because at first you weren't sure, like, answer my prayer, and you
yeah,
had to think about it. And
yeah,
you said you prayed for that. In another
yeah,
interview, you said you prayed for that for a while, a long time.
I did. That was kind of one of my regular things because I've always described it this way. I'm a guy that needs to take apart the watch to see the gears and the springs to know how it works. And when my grandpa died, I was at his funeral. And everybody's saying, Grandpa's in a better place. He's in heaven now. And I kept thinking, heaven? Okay. What's this all about? God, show me heaven. I'm going to need to see it. I don't want people to say he's in a better place. If there's a better place and it's heaven, show me. Prove it to me. Show me because I was kind of arrogant little kid. Hey, come on, God, you can do better than just telling you have faith. And, I want to see it. And I remember always praying that as a kid. You gonna show me heaven yet? Come on, got to show me heaven. And God's just going, okay, kid, just give me a few years. I'll show
Yeah.
you. So
How long did it take you to remember that prayer?
I sort of remembered that, what in the hospital. I do remember that because that was just one of the regular things that I used to always say, show me heaven, God. You know, and now I lay me down to sleep, pray the Lord my soul to keep. And, oh, and by the way, you got to show me heaven. It's
Yeah,
just one
yeah.
of those things.
Well, and I think, in the Gospels, they talk about how, the disciples were with Jesus and people were bringing him bringing these little children for him to bless. And the disciples were like, no, we don't have time for these little ones, and Jesus rebuked them. And he's like, no, and it shows his heart that he heard your prayers. And it's almost like, unfortunately, what you're going through physically gave him this window of like, "Hey, I'm gonna answer your prayer."
Yeah.
It just touches me so much that, we to know that he remembers our prayers even as children is so beautiful. So, you end up, even though you were reluctant at first, you did start to share as you also had to process this experience. And some experts have said it can take 7 years for someone to process this kind of experience. Obviously, I can't relate. I haven't had that experience, but at a certain point, you decide to write a book. However, it was part fiction So you were so compelled to write it. So share a little bit about your book. And I do believe there's an invitation in that, even though it's a fiction book. Is that true?
There is, yeah. So the reason I wrote it, it's called Accidental Heaven. In fact, 7 years. It's funny you mentioned 7 years because it took me 8 years to get the book finished. Even though I started writing, I mean, I'm not a writer by any stretch, but I would write a little bit, and I think, oh, I think I'll do this and this. So I wrote it fiction because I wanted to kind of share my idea that I developed after this NDE, that what if heaven was a physical place right now? I mean, couldn't God put heaven somewhere, and give us a temporary or glorified body? We don't get that yet until he remakes the earth. But I thought, well, what does the Bible say about that? And so I started doing a little research, and there's things like when Stephen was stoned to death, they say that heaven was opened up and he was able to look at and he saw Jesus standing there. And I thought, well, he's mentioning Jesus standing. He's not saying Jesus is floating, Jesus transparent, Jesus that I can see through. He's describing a physical Jesus. I thought that's what I saw. So I came up with this way to kind of look at what if heaven was a real physical place right now, and God's just hiding it from us. And
Mhm.
so that was sort of the reason I did it. At first, I talked to a couple of the nurses and I said, could I write down some of the stuff? Like this one nurse I told about the NDE. I didn't really go into detail. I just said, I think I had an NDE. It's kind of freaky, but it gave me hope. And I said, could I write like a little pamphlet or something and come back and share with your patients? And she says, oh, I'd love to have that. That'd be great. Sure, there's no problem. So I thought, I've got to write something down. So I just started writing and then it just started taking off I thought, well, this is more than a pamphlet. I mean, now I have chapters and I thought, well, just wrap a story around it and put in some of my like crazy God stories and the NDE stuff and, how God's answering prayers with me on a daily basis. And I thought, let's just put that all into a book form and, sort of run with it. I never did go back to the hospital though.
Yeah.
Uh,
But I have to ask, I'm curious. You mentioned the wedding. Did you actually get to go to the wedding?
I did go to the wedding.
Okay.
I did. We finished it up. We had, I mean, you can look at the pictures of the wedding. I look pretty sick. I mean, I'm pretty pale. My favorite pictures of the wedding are black and white because you can't really tell that I'm sick. But yeah, the wedding was beautiful. And then they went off to their honeymoon and they cut their honeymoon short because I was still in the hospital. So,
Oh,
okay.
well, my heart went out to you. I know obviously the heaven part and glory of God is the biggest part of your testimony in Jesus, but I have had a wedding myself. I know all the effort and the
Oh,
cost.
yeah.
It's such a huge event in your life. So I'm glad that you got to go, even though it was probably rough for you. I'm glad you got to attend that. So now you also have your testimony is being written by Guidepost. Can you share a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, so Guideposts about I think it was a year or so ago, they contacted me and they said, "We understand that your NDE in the fictional book is all real, and we just want to kind of document that and just make sure that, it's made up." And I said, "Hey, everything in the hospital is 100% real. Everything that happened is 100% real." Even though it's written as fiction, and if you read the book, you kind of figure out why, because it's obvious it has to be fiction to tell the other part of the story about the heaven being physical, but because it's a little scientific too. But they said, "Would you like to share your testimony in this book?" So they had one of their writers contact me, and we went back and forth. I think it was probably 6 months where we were emailing and phone calls, and because she wanted to get every tiny little detail about the NDE and really my whole life. It's a life story up until the NDE and what I've learned from it and all that kind of stuff. So it's pretty cool. It's in Glimpses of Eternity. It's in their Witnessing Heaven series, and there's 3 other stories in there too.
Wonderful,
Besides,
wonderful. And that's one of the last questions that I wanted to ask you. I have 2 more. How did your relationship with Jesus change and your faith change from before you had the NDE versus now?
boy, I mean, it's just strengthened my faith. Like right off the bat, I took more. I had a lot more appreciation for this world, even though we live under a curse and it's a fallen world and a sinful world, there's so much beauty out there. And with that stressful job that I had, I was just racing along. I was coaching baseball. So I would come home from a stressful job. I would throw the baseball stuff in the truck. I'd jam off to baseball practice or a game or whatever, because I was coaching a couple different teams. Both of my kids, or two of my kids then were playing baseball still. And so it was just, we'd go home, we'd eat dinner somewhere, maybe stop at IHOP and grab a quick meal and then go home, do some homework. And next day, get up and do the same thing again. Just stress, 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 lather, rinse, repeat. It was never ending. And I thought, I do need to slow down. I need to look at the beauty. And that's the one thing that God kind of revealed to me in 12 days in the hospital was, look at the pretty stuff that you're missing. You don't, it's a cliche, but you don't stop and smell the roses. And I never did, and I just thought, I'm missing a lot. I don't stop for sunsets. I don't stop and look at pretty stuff, the landscape, and, the ocean was outside the window of the hospital was up on a hill. And I thought, if it was any other time, I just would look at it and go, yeah, it's the ocean, big deal. But how many people never get to see that beautiful ocean? So my relationship with Jesus became, it was something that, like, Jesus was always a Sunday God, go to church and, you pray. And every once in a while I would pray at the end of the day, hey, give me strength, to get through tomorrow because I had a big stressful day, but that was about it. And then after the NDE, he was walking with me all the time, telling me stuff in my ear. Sometimes I'd hear audible voice, but usually it's just in your spirit, where you just get lost in life, in the business of life. And I honestly felt like in the hospital, I was laying on my back and I could just hear God saying, you are so stressed out. I needed to get you away from all the distractions so you could hear me, and I'm like, you're right, God. I'm whistling through the graveyard, like I've just got to slow down. So he gave me a new appreciation for his creation. That's for sure.
Beautiful. It sounds like he helped you to be more present in the moment, to have
Definitely.
gratitude, which you read about in scripture, and an awareness of him. I know there's so many amazing things you can share about how you've grown in your ability to hear his voice. And if you could share the one, I would love for you to share when he led you, you heard the audible voice and he led you to give a specific amount of money. And
Oh yeah.
you can share
So
that.
that was really something. So the church that I was going to at the time, they came up with this program. They said, we want to raise money so that we can send kids in our neighborhood to church camp for free. It costs $50 per kid, but we want to raise the money. And then whatever amount of money we have, we're going to go out to the neighborhoods and we're going to knock on doors. We're going to say, we have this program. We'd like to send your kids to church camp for free. So we go to this spaghetti dinner. It's a fundraiser kickoff thing. And they're telling about, this program. And we're sitting there and it's, getting kind of quiet. There's a guy from the church talking about this is what we want to do. And I hear somebody behind me say, I want you to give $1,000. And I kind of went, I'm expecting to see somebody back there. And I look around, there's nobody there. And I heard it again. I want you to give $1,000. So very forceful, like you're going to do this. And I turned around real quick, like, who's somebody pranking me, because it was an audible voice, like someone talking in my ear. And after the second time, I said, I don't have $1,000. And my wife says, what? And I said, did you just say something? She says, no. And I said, hmm, okay, somebody just said, I want you to give $1,000. That's a lot of money. So I thought, okay, maybe that was God talking to me. So I thought I need to get away from all these distractions again. That's the thing that I learned during my NDE, right? So I walked out to my car and I sit down in my car and I start praying. I said, God, are you telling me to give $1,000 to this program? And didn't hear anything else. And I thought, okay, well, so I forgot one of the most important parts. So when I'm sitting there just before I got up and left, I said, I don't have $1,000 to give. I hear the voice say again behind me, you'll get it back. And it just kind of freaked me out. So I got up and I went and said my prayer in my car. And I thought, okay, if I'm supposed to give $1,000, he says I'm going to give it back. I'm going to grab my checkbook. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to be obedient. I'm going to do it. And so when I walk in, the friend named Phil that I told you about earlier, he meets me at the door when I come back in and he goes, I was just coming out to see if you're all right. What's going on? And I said, God just told me to give $1,000 to this. And he said, I'll get it back. And he goes, really? He says, so if that was from God, God already knows that you're going to tell me, and I'm going to accept that as a challenge. So I'm going to write a check for $1,000 too. And I'm like, no, Phil, you don't have to do that. He goes, oh, I do. He says, you going to write your check? I said, yeah. So we both went up there, wrote $1,000, gave it to the guy on the stage, right? And everybody's all clapping and they thought that was pretty cool. So the next day, and my wife was kind of like, you just give $1,000, you know? And I said, God said I get it back. So don't worry about it. So she's skeptical at this point. So the next day I go to work. I come home for lunch because I was working in a subdivision where I was building a house and I was also living in the house that I just built. And I had done some day trading. Like I had this TD Ameritrade account and I sat down and I logged in because I was going to see what the market was doing that day. I log in and I look at my the total amount in there wasn't much. It's only a couple $1,000, but it had gone up by $1,000. One of these accounts, I mean, stocks had gone up $1,000, and I thought, whoa, time to sell. So I quickly sell that. I get off. I get done. I look at the amount, and there's in my account there's $1,000 more, and I looked at that amount and I thought, $1,000. I just got $1,000 back. God said I would get it back. And I thought, my check hasn't even cleared the bank that I wrote to the church, and I just got $1,000 back. So as I'm walking out, I pick up the phone and of course I call Phil and I go, hey, you're not going to believe it. I just got $1,000 back. And he's like, you got to be kidding. I said, no, got it back.
That is awesome. I have never heard I can't say I've ever heard the audible voice of God, but it is biblical. There were people in scripture that did hear the audible voice, and I have many guests that have. I know it's biblical, so that is amazing. I know there's so many more you could share, but in the interest of time, I do want you to think about, I know there's people listening right now. Their faith is very shaky, and maybe they're thinking, is this Jesus real? Maybe they're questioning heaven. And as someone who's had the testimony that you have had, what would you say to that person?
Wow. I would say, definitely, seek him out. What I started doing was I asked him to reveal himself to me. I mean, even when I was a kid, I was asking that, not really realizing that was what I was asking. But the Bible does say, if you draw close to God, he will draw close to you. And you'll feel that, you'll know it, you'll know he's real. I mean, I hate to use another cliche like heaven's real because I've been there, but it's more than just faith now. I've seen it. I held the hand of Jesus and it wasn't, it was a physical thing. And I just know that there is life after death. There's life during this life too. I mean, Jesus is with me all the time, answering all these prayers, tiny miracles every day. I see his presence every day, but you just have to be aware of it. I think you just have to seek him out and he's real. I mean, but he'll reveal himself to you.
Yeah, wonderful. So awesome. Okay, Mike, this has been amazing. I just want to remind the listeners to check out the books that he's written. I'll put the links below, so check those out. And I always say a prayer before I end my episode. So if you don't mind, is there anything else you want to share, Mike, before we wrap up?
No, that's good. Jesus is with me every single day. So just start praying that prayer of, reveal yourself to me, Lord.
Wonderful. I love it. Well, dear Heavenly Father, Lord, I thank you for this day. I thank you for Mike. I thank you that he was able to make the wedding, which may feel small compared to all the other pieces. But Lord, I mostly thank you for who you are and that you hear our prayers even as children, and they matter to you, Lord. I thank you for helping him to survive miraculously what happened in the hospital, a ruptured appendix, that he's alive, Lord, and he's able to share the testimony of your glory and your beautiful son, and just the fact that we don't have to die to have this relationship with you. We can seek you now, and we can learn to hear from you, God, and that you love us and you care for us the way that you do. So I pray for blessings over Mike. I pray for blessings over the people listening to this right now, Lord. And I pray that you would open their spiritual senses and draw them to you, Lord, so that they would know you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All
Amen.
right. Mike, thank you so much. Everyone,
Sure.
thank you for listening today. Check out the links below and God bless.